Hey! I feel 4 feet tall.
He was the fastest man in Hollywood. Not because he could outrun others, but because time itself seemed unable to catch him. On screen, Michael J. Fox ran through decades in a single leap, laughing in the face of paradox, youth incarnate, the living promise of tomorrow. Back to the Future did more than crown a movie star. It turned a young man into a symbol: speed, energy, endless motion, a future that always waited just one step ahead. By the late 1980s, Fox stood at a peak few actors ever reach. Television adored him. Cinema worshipped him. His name meant optimism, momentum, and an almost reckless faith in what lay ahead. The world saw a body that never stopped moving, a smile that never tired, a career accelerating faster with every passing year. But fate does not announce itself with thunder. Sometimes, and it arrives quietly, on an ordinary morning, inside a trembling hand. At just 29 years old, while the future still belonged to him, Michael J. Fox was told that his own body would begin to slow down, permanently, invisibly, without mercy. The cameras kept rolling. The applause did not stop. And no one noticed the war beginning beneath his skin. So here is the question that defines this life, and perhaps our own. When your body starts betraying you before the world is ready to let you go, do you run faster, or do you finally stop? Before the world learned his name, before time travel and lightning strikes and a silver DeLorean rewrote cinematic history, Michael J. Fox was simply a small boy trying to move fast enough to be seen. He was born in 1961 in Edmonton, Canada, the fourth of 5 children in a family that rarely stayed still. His father, a police officer in the Canadian Armed Forces, was reassigned often. New cities arrived without warning. New schools followed. Just as friendships began to settle, they were uprooted again. Childhood for Michael was not a place. It was a series of departures. He learned early that stability was temporary. And so, unconsciously, he learned to hurry. Small in stature, quick in speech, restless in energy, young Michael developed the instincts of someone who believed the world might leave him behind if he paused too long. The teachers noticed it. Classmates felt it. He was the kid who talked fast, moved faster, and filled every silence with motion. Not out of arrogance, but out of fear. Fear of becoming invisible. At home, there was warmth, but also a quiet emotional distance born from constant relocation. Love existed, but it was not always spoken aloud. There was little room for indulgence, little patience for dreams that could not be packed into boxes and carried to the next address. Acting was not yet a plan. It was simply an escape. Television became his refuge. Not the glowing fantasies themselves, but the idea behind them. Somewhere, beyond these transient rooms and unfamiliar hallways, there existed a world where people stayed long enough to be remembered. By his early teens, Michael had discovered something remarkable. When he performed, whether in school plays or local auditions, people listened. His speed, once a defense mechanism, became an asset. His rapid delivery carried wit. His nervous energy translated into charm. Casting directors did not see a small boy struggling to be noticed. They saw electricity. At 15, while most of his peers were still negotiating adolescence, Michael made a decision that frightened his parents and defined his future. He left home to pursue acting professionally in Los Angeles. It was not a triumphant departure. It was a quiet leap into uncertainty. Hollywood did not welcome him with open arms. It rarely does. He lived in cramped apartments. He worked long hours for small roles. He learned the anatomy of rejection intimately. The polite smiles, the unreturned calls, the feeling of being interchangeable. His size worked against him. His youth made him expendable. His ambition at times seemed reckless. But Michael Fox did not know how to slow down. So he kept moving. Television offered the first lifeline. Small parts led to slightly larger ones. Commercials followed. Then, in 1982, a role arrived that would alter his trajectory. Alex P. Keaton on the sitcom Family Ties. Alex Keaton was everything Michael was not supposed to be. Conservative, arrogant, sharp-tongued. Yet beneath the political bravado lived something fragile. A young man desperate to be taken seriously in a world that underestimated him. Audiences felt the contradiction instantly. So did Michael. Week after week, millions invited him into their living rooms. He was no longer invisible. He was adored. The show became a cultural touchstone of the Reagan era, and then Michael J. Fox, newly rebranded with a middle initial to avoid confusion with another actor, became one of television's brightest young stars. Fame, however, did not slow him down. It only increased the pace. While Family Ties filmed during the day, Michael took on feature films at night. He slept in cars. He memorized scripts between takes. He lived on adrenaline and youth, convinced, like so many before him, that the body could be negotiated with. Then came the role that almost never was. Back to the Future began filming with another actor in the lead. Weeks into production, the footage felt wrong. The timing was off. The energy was misaligned. Desperation set in. The studio made a radical decision: recast the lead and reshoot. Michael J. Fox was the first choice, but he was unavailable. He was already committed to Family Ties. But the solution was compromise, bordering on cruelty. Michael would film television by day, cinema by night. For months, his life collapsed into an endless loop of sets, scripts, and exhaustion. There was no margin for error, no space for rest. Yet something extraordinary happened in the midst of that chaos. Michael became Marty McFly. On screen, he moved like lightning. His body obeyed him completely, leaping across timelines, dodging consequences, laughing in the face of inevitability. The film was released in 1985 and detonated across the world. Box office records fell. Pop culture shifted. A generation found its hero. Michael J. Fox was no longer simply successful. He was essential. The late 1980s crowned him relentlessly. Teen Wolf, The Secret of My Success. Awards followed. Contracts grew. His schedule remained inhuman, and he was everywhere, all at once, embodying youth itself. But bodies, unlike careers, keep their own ledgers. The first signs were easy to dismiss. A stiffness here, a tremor there, fatigue that sleep did not resolve. Michael assumed what everyone assumed. He was overworked. He was young. It would pass. It did not. In 1991, at the age of 29, he woke up in a Florida hotel room with a twitching pinky finger. Not pain, not injury, just a movement he could not command. A neurologist confirmed what no rising star expects to hear: Parkinson's disease. The diagnosis arrived quietly. No press, no announcement, no collapse. Just a sentence that redefined time itself. Parkinson's is not an explosion, it is erosion. Michael told almost no one. Not the studio, not the audience, not even many of his friends. He feared the truth would end his career faster than the disease ever could. And so he did what he had always done. He moved faster. He continued to act. He continued to smile. He continued to perform roles that demanded precision, while his body began betraying him in increments too small for the camera to catch, but large enough for him to feel every moment. Alcohol became a temporary anesthetic. Denial, a survival strategy. He structured his days around medication schedules and his nights around exhaustion. To the world, Michael J. Fox remained unchanged. Inside, a different story unfolded. The man who once represented the future now lived in negotiations with each morning. Buttoning shirts took longer. Scripts required new strategies. Movement, once effortless, demanded concentration. Yet, even in decline, his work did not lose its brilliance. Performances deepened. Humor sharpened. Vulnerability crept into characters once defined by speed alone. Eventually, the secret grew too heavy. In the late 1990s, Michael made a decision that required more courage than any role he had ever played. He went public, he spoke the words aloud. Parkinson's. Hollywood did not recoil. But it did not wait either. Offers slowed. Leading roles vanished. The industry, always forward-facing, turned its gaze elsewhere. For the first time in decades, Michael stopped running. He stepped back from full-time acting. He focused on his family. He began to reimagine purpose beyond performance. What remained was not the man who outran time, but the man who learned to live inside it. This was not the end of his story, and it was the moment the story changed direction. And as his career quieted, the true battle, the one without applause or scripts, was only beginning. Tragedy did not strike Michael J. Fox with a single catastrophic moment. It crept in. It arrived in millimeters, in seconds, in the subtle betrayal of muscle and nerve. Parkinson's did not announce itself with pain. It announced itself with uncertainty. A hand that no longer obeyed. A foot that hesitated. A body that, for the first time in his life, refused to move at the speed of his will. At 29, Michael J. Fox was told something no rising star is prepared to hear. This would not get better. There would be medication, adjustments, management, but no cure. The disease would progress, quietly and relentlessly, until every movement became a negotiation. For a man whose entire identity had been built on motion, timing, and precision, this was not merely a medical diagnosis. It was an existential verdict. At first, denial felt reasonable. The tremor was small, the stiffness intermittent. He convinced himself that discipline, youth, and sheer willpower could outrun biology. After all, he had outrun every obstacle before. Poverty, size, competition, exhaustion. Why not this? So he did what he had always done when fear appeared. He worked. But now, working meant hiding. He learned how to keep his left side still while cameras rolled. He adjusted blocking to minimize movement. He rehearsed endlessly so that muscle memory could compensate for what his nervous system no longer provided. He swallowed pills on rigid schedules, chasing windows of control measured in hours. And when the control slipped, when the tremor broke through, he smiled wider. To the world, Michael J. Fox remained charming, energetic, unstoppable. Behind closed doors, the cost was mounting. Sleep became fragmented. Anxiety filled the spaces between takes. Alcohol, once social, became medicinal. It quieted the fear temporarily. It blurred the edges of reality just enough to allow him to continue. But alcohol is a debt, not a solution. As the disease progressed, so did the internal collapse. The man who had spent his life accelerating now lived in constant anticipation of slowing down. Every morning carried a question he was afraid to ask. What will I lose today? The losses came unevenly. Some days were manageable, others were humiliating. Buttons resisted him. Shoelaces became adversaries. Simple gestures, signatures, handshakes turned into sources of shame. Hollywood, however, does not pause for private suffering. Scripts still arrived, but the roles changed. Less physicality, less range, less future. He felt the unspoken calculation behind every offer. How long can he still do this? The answer was unclear, even to him. The psychological toll deepened. Michael spoke later of waking each day with dread, of living inside a body that felt unfamiliar, unreliable. Depression followed, not as a dramatic spiral, but as a quiet erosion of confidence. He was still loved, still respected, but he no longer trusted himself. The cruel irony was impossible to ignore. The man who had symbolized youth and possibility on screen now measured life in pill bottles and symptom charts. And the same industry that had once demanded his exhaustion now observed his decline with polite distance. There were no villains, no conspiracies, just an unforgiving system built on momentum. Eventually, the weight of secrecy became heavier than the disease itself. In 1998, after years of hiding, Michael J. Fox made his illness public. The announcement was not theatrical. It was measured, calm, almost apologetic. He explained his condition, his plans, his uncertainty. The response was sympathetic, but irreversible. Leading roles faded. Insurance concerns surfaced. Studios hesitated. Hollywood did not exile him. It simply moved on. For the first time since childhood, Michael was not needed urgently. And that too was a loss. He stepped away from full-time acting shortly thereafter. Not because he wanted to, but because continuing meant lying. To himself. To audiences. To the truth his body was now forcing him to confront. Retreating from the spotlight did not bring immediate peace. Without work, the disease became louder. Without structure, fear filled the space. He struggled with identity. Who was he without speed, without applause, without constant motion? For years, he had been defined by what he could do. Now he was being defined by what he could no longer control. The darkest period followed. He later admitted that alcohol nearly destroyed him, that despair flirted with permanence, that some nights felt unbearably long. Parkinson's did not just attack his body. It challenged his sense of worth. But tragedy, when endured long enough, can transform, slowly, painfully. Michael began to accept a truth he had resisted his entire life. Slowing down was no longer optional. It was survival. He entered recovery. He sought help. He allowed others to see weakness he had hidden since childhood. Acceptance did not arrive as relief. It arrived as surrender. And in that surrender, something unexpected emerged. Freed from the obligation to perform youth, Michael discovered a different kind of purpose. One that did not depend on physical mastery. One rooted in advocacy, honesty, and shared struggle. He founded a research foundation. He spoke openly. He became visible again, not as a hero of fiction, but as a witness to reality. The disease did not retreat. Symptoms worsened. Balance deteriorated. Speech softened. Each public appearance carried risk. Each fall became news. Each tremor became symbolic. But the fear changed shape. He was no longer afraid of being seen as broken. He was afraid of being silent. And so he spoke. The tragedy of Michael J. Fox is not that he lost his body too early. It is that he was forced to mourn a version of himself while still alive. To grieve not a death, but a future that would never arrive. Yet within that grief, something endured. A clarity, a humility, a resilience unconnected to speed. The man who once outran time now lived inside it, fully aware of its limits, fully present within its constraints. This was the crucible, and from it, a different legacy would emerge. In the end, Michael J. Fox did not disappear. He transformed. The world often imagines redemption as a return. Back to the stage, back to applause, back to what was lost. But for Michael J. Fox, there would be no return to the man who once ran through time without consequence. That version of himself belonged to another life, another body, another rhythm. This chapter was slower, quieter, and infinitely more honest. After stepping away from full-time acting, Michael found himself living a life stripped of urgency. There were no frantic call times, no scripts to memorize overnight, no cameras demanding energy he could no longer summon on command. What remained was space, an unfamiliar and frightening gift. At first, the silence felt like loss. Then it began to feel like truth. He spent more time at home, with his wife, with his children. Moments that once passed unnoticed, breakfast conversations, afternoons without schedules, evenings unburdened by performance, became anchors. His body still betrayed him. Parkinson's did not soften its grip. Tremors persisted. Balance worsened. Falls became frequent, sometimes public, sometimes painful enough to leave scars. But something else began to steady. Perspective. Michael learned to measure days not by productivity, but by presence. Not by what he accomplished, but by what he endured with grace. He learned that slowing down did not erase meaning. It revealed it. In time, he returned to the public eye, but on his own terms. Not as a leading man racing against the clock, but as a witness standing beside others in similar battles. He spoke openly about Parkinson's, about fear, about the humiliation of dependency, about the quiet courage required to face a future that narrows rather than expands. His honesty changed the conversation. And no longer was Parkinson's an abstract diagnosis whispered about in hospitals. It had a face, a voice, a story that refused to be reduced to tragedy alone. Through his foundation, Michael redirected the relentless energy that once fueled his career into research, advocacy, and hope. Not the shallow hope of miracles, but the durable hope of the progress. He became something Hollywood rarely celebrates, a man who stayed. There were moments of return to acting, carefully chosen, carefully managed. Appearances that carried weight, not because of nostalgia, but because of vulnerability. The tremor was visible now, the voice softer, the movements deliberate. And yet, audiences listened more closely than ever. Because truth has gravity. Michael never pretended to be healed. He never sold resilience as triumph. Eager he spoke instead of acceptance, not surrender to despair, but surrender to reality. He acknowledged the anger, the grief, the exhaustion of living inside a body that changes the rules without consent. And then he spoke of gratitude, not gratitude for the disease, but for what it revealed. It revealed who stayed when the spotlight dimmed. It revealed how fragile the myths of success truly are. It revealed that dignity is not found in control, but in courage. As years passed, Parkinson's took more from him. Speech became more difficult, walking more dangerous, public appearances more taxing. There were falls that ended with broken bones, moments when he questioned how much longer he could remain visible without becoming a spectacle. Yet he returned again and again, not to inspire, not to perform bravery, but to remind. To remind the world that life does not end when speed is taken away, that value does not vanish when productivity fades, that meaning does not belong exclusively to the young, the strong, or the untouched. Michael J. Fox became, quietly, a counter-narrative to Hollywood itself. In an industry obsessed with momentum, he embodied stillness. In a culture addicted to youth, he embodied aging with honesty. In a world that celebrates winning, He embodied endurance. The man who once outran time now walked beside it, step by deliberate step. And perhaps that is the most profound legacy of all. Not the box office numbers, not the iconic roles, not even the foundation bearing his name, but the permission he gave others to slow down without shame, to acknowledge pain without apology, to remain visible even when imperfect, to understand that a meaningful life is not measured by how fast we move forward, but by how faithfully we live within our limits. As the years continue to narrow his physical world, Michael's impact expands in another direction, outward, into the lives of those who see themselves reflected in his struggle. People living with illness, with aging parents, with bodies that refuse to cooperate, with dreams altered, not destroyed. His story does not promise salvation. It offers something quieter, companionship. And so, when the cameras finally stop for good, when the voice softens beyond projection, when movement becomes memory, what will remain is not the image of a young man sprinting through time. It will be the image of a man who stayed when running was no longer possible, who chose truth over illusion, presence over speed, humanity over heroism. And if there is a lesson left behind in the slowing footsteps of Michael J. Fox, it is this: life will take from us without asking. Time will make its demands. Bodies will fail. But kindness, once given, does not tremble. Courage, once chosen, does not fall. And love, quiet, persistent, unhurried, outlives them all. So if you see yourself somewhere in this story, if your own life has begun to slow, if the future no longer stretches as far as it once did, do not be afraid. Sometimes, the most meaningful journeys are the ones that teach us how to stay.